Mario, it's excellent to have you here.
Nice to meet you.
All the way from Brazil with Terça Livre, Free Tuesday, rare conservative media in Brazil. Tell me a little bit more about the media.
Yeah, so, we started a few years ago when the conservative movement in Brazil really picked up any sort of steam, I'd say around 2014. We didn't have any conservative media or any conservative movement at all.
4 years ago?
Yeah.
Wait a second.
Very recent.
The president.
Right.
That's a big shift in 4 years.
Oh, it's big shifts. I mean, we had a president in the 1990s is where we first had our socialist president called Fernando Henrique Cardoso. He was a democratic socialist, as they like to call it. He's very close to George Soros, actually. And then right in the beginning of the 21st century, we had Lula da Silva, who's more well-known. He's in prison now for corruption. He's from the Workers' Party. And then right after him was Dilma Rousseff, also from the Workers' Party. So we had about 20, 30 years of socialism in Brazil. Obviously, it was a disaster, not only economically, but morally. And people were not only really upset about the economic catastrophe that they brought, but also the complete degradation of moral values. The streets were unsafe, drugs were coming in. We were financing all of the communist regimes in Cuba and Venezuela. We were a big reason why those regimes are standing to this day because of those governments. And people just took a look and said, you know what? Socialism isn't working and we need to change.
And so somehow 4 years ago, this conservative movement in Brazil started to form.
Right.
Why did it take so long?
Right. So
this is interesting. We'll get back to this, Livre. Don't worry. But this will be very interesting to our folks.
No, absolutely. So what really happened is the left always used to run all the street activism. So every time there was a street protest, it was always run by the left. In June of 2013, there's a protest that started in São Paulo, but went all over Brazil for a free bus pass. The left was promoting everything, all bus passes should be free and all that. And people who were just common folk, were not ideological, said, you know what, I'm going to go to the street and protest my own cause. And every single Brazilian was tired of corruption, tired of injustice, went to the streets, protested. We're talking about millions and millions of people across cities in Brazil. And they all came together and said, you know what, we're going to change. The left realized, okay, there's something happening here. There's a trigger. And this is the point where Dilma Rousseff goes into stadiums in Brazil, gets booed by the crowd. This is where it all starts. And we have an intellectual leader here in the United States called Olavo de Carvalho, who's been warning Brazilians about the dangers of socialism and communism for 20, 30 years, but no one gave him any attention. And then people started listening to this guy. And President Bolsonaro was also warning people of the dangers of communism and the history of communism in Brazil in the 60s and 70s and their guerrilla operations, terrorist operations in Brazil. People started to actually do their research and try to learn about these things. And from there onwards, the left just started losing the narrative and started losing the street activism that they always ran.
So, Terça Livre, tell me a little bit about the genesis of the organization.
Alan dos Santos is our founder. He's been is one of the students of Olavo de Carvalho.
Okay.
So Olavo de Carvalho is not only an intellectual leader, but he's also a professor. So he's a philosopher. So he's not only the intellectual leader, but the guy who does courses and writes books and sells a lot of books on this. So Alan dos Santos is one of his students.
So it's on Brazilian conservatism or broader.
Right. So. Yeah. Right, it's about just the history. So Olavo de Carvalho teaches about the history of communism, the origin, the different intellectual leaders of socialism, like Antonio Gramsci, all those different guys. But of course, he ties it back into, this is how the global socialist and global communist movement influenced in Brazil, and this is the history of how KGB operated in Brazil, the history of Chinese communists operating in Brazil, and Alan dos Santos going back to that as one of those students, and really one of the things that Olavo always stresses to his students is we can't just have an election and win for a conservative. We have to change the culture. We have to fight the culture war, right? And Alan dos Santos is a guy who said, you know what, my way of doing this is starting this media organization called Terça Livre, and I'm going to combat the massive amount.
And what year is this?
I couldn't pinpoint to you exactly what year it was. I know it was within the last 5 years.
Okay, got it.
It was at the origin of the conservative movement. As it's all is unfolding, right.
Got it.
And it's also because it's more on the internet, so it's more of a social media, YouTube kind of media, so it couldn't be around for a long time, the traditional media kind of platforms. But his reason was, all of our media is left-wing. Our newspapers, our main TV channels, they're all left-wing organizations. So his way of contributing and fighting the culture war was starting Terça Livre to get this actual real information out to people.
So I take it there's been a bit of growth since then?
Oh yeah, there's millions of followers across different social media platforms, YouTube. They're very well known. As I was mentioning to you before, Bolsonaro as president invites Terça Livre as one of his preferred media sources.
Well, I was going to say, I'm sure probably played a bit of a role in Bolsonaro's election.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bolsonaro basically won in Brazil because of social media. You got outspent 25-1 by his opponent. So think about if Bolsonaro spent $1 million, his opponent is spending 25 million.
It sounds like people are just tired of that system.
What it is, you got outspent.
This is another one of these stories, right? You know, we have Venezuela, right? We have, you know, Brazil, people fed up and, you know, basically shifting wholesale in the conservative direction. We're still talking about socialism here in America. Not only are we talking about it, it's being fronted as a solution, as an alternative. Do you think we're crazy here in America?
No. That's the thing. So the left is always really good at narrative, and they're very good at emotional arguments, right? They're not good at all at logical arguments. But we are, but we don't know how to do that how to convey that in an effective way. And that's one reason I'm here as well, is to warn a lot of Americans of what socialism can bring to you. Because what we hear a lot from the Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez is, oh no, we just want socialism like Sweden. We just want it like Denmark. We don't want the Venezuelan or the Cuban socialism. But those Scandinavian countries aren't real socialism. The rhetoric that I hear from Bernie Sanders and from Ocasio-Cortez is exactly the rhetoric I hear from the Workers' Party in Brazil. The exact policies and the exact narratives and everything that they're pushing here and the way they go about pushing their agenda is precisely identical. That's what shocked me the most, is having this international perspective and observing communist and socialist takeovers of Latin America with the same exact, we're here for the poor, we're here for the oppressed, let's divide by class, you're racist, you're homophobic, we need to tax more, tax the rich. It's exactly the same rhetoric. And the disaster, as you can see in Venezuela, Brazil was that close to getting there if we didn't have someone like Bolsonaro coming in power.
Oh, this is an extremely powerful message to be sharing with our audiences.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah.